Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings, but this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018, and no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Lara Love Hardin is the author of The Many Lives of Mama Love, a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing. You have probably seen this in newspapers and magazines because it has gotten so much press. Most recently, it was selected by Jeanette McCurdy for her book club. She's been the #1 bestseller of I'm Glad My Mom Died for like the whole year. I don't even know. Anyway, Lara Love Hardin has an MFA in creative writing and is a 4-time New York Times bestselling writer, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, Designing Your Life by Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, and 2018 Oprah Book Club pick, The Sun Does Shine, which she co-authored with Anthony Ray Hinton about his 30 years as an innocent man on Alabama's death row. There are well over 1 million copies sold of the many books she has written, and you can find her on the title page and in the acknowledgments of books by Nelson Mandela, John Gottman, Evie Pompouras, and other luminary authors on the Idea Architects roster. In 2019, she won a Christopher Award for her work affirming the highest values of the human spirit. In 2019, she was also nominated for an NAACP Image Award, won the Moore Prize in the UK, and was shortlisted for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. In 2020, she launched her own division within Idea Architects True, as a literary agent specializing in memoir. She lives in La Selva Beach, California, with her 3rd husband, 3 dogs, 3 cats, and 3 teenagers. She also has 21 chickens, 4 ducks, and 3 adult sons who live at home on holidays and big laundry days. Again, this is called The Many Lives of Mama Love by Lara Love Hardin. Welcome, Lara. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss The Many Lives of Mama Love, your memoir.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, what a joy. So I watched your entire TEDx talk, which was riveting and amazing. And you are like so sensational and have such a powerful story. So tell me first of all, I want you to tell listeners the whole thing, but I also, not the whole TED talk, but
I was born, no.
a summary. And then when it became a book as well. So take
Great.
It where you want.
So the whole story, or sort of I'll give you the story of the book, which is kind of the whole story. Well, It's not the whole story, but So it's really a story of being like suburban soccer mom. I have 4 children, 4 boys and 2 stepchildren. So I had 6 children, and I became addicted to opiates, first pain medication and then heroin. I ended up pleading guilty to 32 felonies, spending a year in the county jail and basically losing everything and everyone that made up who I was, right? So I was no longer mom, wife, little league coach, all the things were gone. And then when I got out, as I said in my TED talk, jobless, homeless, carless, friendless, without my children, and all I had was a whole lot of shame and an MFA in creative writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not, which I had gotten, in my 20s. So the second half of the book is really the story of reentry and trying to move past the worst thing I've ever done and the worst version of myself I've ever been, and sort of rediscovering my love of writing and reading and working at a literary agency. This crazy story, working with some amazing people in the world like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, becoming a ghostwriter where I was kind of hiding in the acknowledgments of books, and really thinking if I was good adjacent, I could prove to myself in the world that I was good, or more good than bad, right? And, it's a crazy story. The reason I did the book is because objectively, I was like, that's a crazy story, But, the subtitle is a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing. So it kind of covers all of those things. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then you end up, doing an Oprah book club pick collaboration, and you're like, here we are at lunch. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Can you take us through how you went from MFA in your 20s to heroin?
That old story. No. So, the first line of my book is reading was my first addiction, and I had a pretty, fairly traumatic childhood, a lot of addiction and alcoholism in my family. And I always thought I could like out educate myself from that, right? Like I thought education was inoculation. So if I just focus on school, which I always loved, and I went straight, to college 3,000 miles away from home. I grew up in the East Coast. So I went as far away from home as I could, went to college, went straight to graduate school. And I had 3 boys in 4.5 years right after my master's degree. And I was in a really unhappy marriage. My husband was cheating on me. And I think, I'm not someone who ever learned to say like, hey, I think I have a problem, or I need some help, or I'm depressed. I think I was really depressed because I had in my mind that I was just going to have this Leave It to Beaver family. I'm aging myself, but this kind of like fairy tale perfect family, perfect mom, perfect wife, like thing that I didn't have growing up. And so the problem with having this sort of imaginary perfect world in your head is when reality doesn't match up, it's really hard. So I think I was depressed, and back in the 90s, before the opiate crisis was a crisis, like Vicodin was handed out like in little sample packs, like, oh, your ear hurts, here's some Vicodin. Oh, you're going to have, your teeth cleaned, here's some Vicodin. Oh, you're having a baby, here's some Vicodin after. And so I remember really clearly, my kids were little. I had 3 little kids. I took a Vicodin for something, and it made me feel joy, right? Like I felt like not depressed. And the way opiates work in my brain is to like give me energy and excitement, like caffeine. And so I was like, oh, okay, I can pretend my marriage is okay. I can pretend that life is going the way I had planned it. And so one turns into 2 to have that same feeling, and so on and so on. So jumping way ahead. So I kind of struggled with that on and off, and I would quit a million times and think I don't have a problem because I can quit, right? And like taking two Vicodin a day turned into taking 60 a day.
Oh my gosh.
Which is it's just a crazy amount. It's a crazy amount of tolerance that you build up. I had my first marriage. When that broke up, I got married to my second husband, who I had my 4th son with, and he was struggling with addiction. And one time I found some sticky brown stuff on we moved into a new home in this cul-de-sac and bought a business. And I found this little sticky stuff, and I called a friend of mine. I was like, what is this? I had no idea what it was. And, there were lots of other struggles going on at the time. And so I Googled, I was going to volunteer at my kids all went to Montessori school. So I was going to volunteer to do an arts and crafts project. But on the way there at the red light, I was Googling how to smoke heroin. Like, how do you do that? So later that day, I tried it. I've never been really
What was the sticky brown stuff?
It was, it was black tar heroin. And so he had, it's not something he did. So he had started doing this, and I Googled how to smoke it and started smoking it. And then in the course of 10 months, my life was over. The police came and arrested me. My youngest son was almost 4 at the time, and he was the only one home. So Child Protective Services took him. And it was really this race to get him back. Well, but I was in jail, and you only had a year because of his age. So it was traumatizing for the entire family. My face was on the front page of the paper. One of my older sons was in junior high at the time, and he said that newspaper was in every single classroom all day long, every class he went to. So that is that's a quick summary.
But then I go on your Instagram, and you're like, there are your beautiful boys, like all grown up, and you're all happy and like doing like all these great, wonderful things. And like, oh my gosh, how far did she come? And so fast.
Yeah, it feels fast, and it feels really long at the same time. Yeah, we were just on a family vacation, 10 people last week. We just got back. And there's moments like that. We were in Maui. And so I was sitting there. And when I was in jail, I remember this, when I first got there, and I didn't know I didn't know jail politics. I didn't know how to function. I didn't know what the rules were, like regardless of my crimes, like I'm a rule follower,
Yeah.
So, and I was like, where's my orientation? Like, where's my
packet?
Where's my welcome? Where's my, list of amenity? Where's my welcome brochure? But I remember this girl had this one woman who was in a locked cell, and she had a postcard. And on one side, it was a Hawaiian island. I don't remember which. If I were making it up, I could say it was Maui, but I don't remember what it was. And I remember looking at that during that year so many times and just being like, I'll never go there again. Like, I'll never get, like, that's over for me. So there was a moment last week when we were in Maui, and I was like looking at all my boys, and, some of them had partners and my stepdaughter. And I was like, oh, here we are. Like, there's still moments, like, it seems like just yesterday, because you can see I still get emotional about it. But it is really, that year and then the years after, because it was like rebuilding life is not the easiest thing to do with a criminal record, for sure. But, sometimes when I'm like, oh, I don't want to wash the dishes, or I don't want to mop the floor. And I was like, oh, at least I'm doing it for my own family, not 32 women, like in jail. And so it did create a lot of gratitude that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. And that still feels like yesterday sometimes. So.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the fact that you got to such a low point, like that you were like, this is, life's not worth living.
Yeah.
To such joy. And like that you're like, I mean, it's really incredible, the trajectory. And then to be able to write about it on top of all that is yet another gift, right? It's not just the, amazingness of that experience, but to be able to beautifully put it into words and tell your story and get it out there, especially since you work in words and help authors all the time. So wait, tell me more about your firm, which, by the way, sounds really cool. I was like,
Thank you.
This is amazing. They help authors all the way through. Like, tell me how Doug like took you under his wing, and
yeah,
Doug, and your memoir division. I'm like, wait, tell me everything.
Yeah. So it's a crazy story, because it was 2011. So, a couple years plus out of jail, and really struggling to get a job with a record, get a job, meet all of the court requirements. It's kind of it's a really hard system to navigate when you're on probation, you're trying to meet all the requirements. And so I started working for this company called Content Divas, where it was like, write 1,600 words a day, like blogs, like SEO blogs, and it was crazy, because they were like, travel blogs, or like 10 blogs about how to, I was trying to find metaphors for savings accounts, right? Like, savings account is like, just writing, but it was like really good experience to write quickly every day, very little money. And so I was, struggling, like, how am I going to pay rent and pay court fines and all of these things? And so I saw a Craigslist ad for a literary agent, like part-time assistant. And I was like, an agency that's working with Desmond Tutu is advertising on Craigslist, like, pretty sure I might get murdered, but I'm going to call, And so I called them, and I was like, is this, because the ad was pretty old, is this job still available? And they're like, yeah, but, get your letter in quickly. And it was like a long list of questions, like qualities, like way over the top for a part-time assistant job. So I was like, oh, this is a fun writing exercise, And I answered it honestly. I didn't say, by the way, I have a criminal record. And I remember I was at the welfare office with my son, who is 5 now. And when you have a drug conviction, you can't get any cash welfare. You can't get any benefits, because that's just the law. And so I was kind of appealing that. And I got a phone call, sitting in a miserable office, trying to entertain a toddler who is miserable, surrounded by people who are all miserable. And I get this call, like, can you come to this job interview in an hour? And like, I think I'd been waiting 2 hours, and it was like, do I go to the job interview? I had a car that didn't go uphill, right? So I didn't know, like, and I was like, do I go to this job interview? Do I stay here to try and get some food stamps or something? And so it was like one of those decision moments. I was like, okay, I'll be there in an hour. I didn't know who I was going to get to watch Caden. Like, I was not dressed for an interview, but I went there, and I got the job with Doug Abrams, who had been an editor at HarperCollins and started his own literary agency. And he immediately had me like editing a Tutu biography and working on a book proposal. And, I remember like Googling like Word, how to do track changes, And I started working there, immediately started ghostwriting or collaborative writing for an author. I told Doug, like, oh, I have this idea. He's like, what do you think of this proposal? And I had this idea about how to structure it. And he was like, hold on, I'm conferencing you in with the author. And I remember being like, I can't talk to an author. Like it was just like this sort of panic situation. And I said my idea, and it was just kind of like, okay, great, you're going to work on it with him. And it ended up selling in a big auction. And then I was just off and running, doing all the things to run a literary agency and collaborating. I think I collaborated on 12 books in 7 years there, or 10 years. And it was, Doug never asked me at the beginning, do you have a criminal record? Like if I just met you on the street, it's not the first thing you're going to think, like, hey, do you have 32 felonies by any chance? It's not the first thing you think. And he didn't ask, and I had kind of a don't ask, don't tell. Like I was going to be honest if he asked, but it wasn't something I was going to volunteer. And so we were in the office about, I don't know, I've been working for a few weeks, and he had very trusting, like immediately handed over like all his passwords and all his things, and I was just like, okay, I'm, going to do this job so well, like this is my chance to rebuild my life. And he was talking to an author who did, Dick Bolts, who did What Color's Your Parachute, right? That was one of the books our agency did. And well, now people Google their employers, talking about a new edition of the book. And so as we were sitting there, Doug Googled me. And I remember that moment because I was sitting at my desk, and it was just like the air changed. And I looked up, and he was looking at me with just like this look of horror on his face because he Googled me and that front page headline popped up. And it was just this moment. He was like, I didn't call your references, like go home, come back tomorrow, we'll talk about it. And I left there and I was so ashamed. Aww. And I was like, I will never come back. Like, I can't come back. And I spent the night not sleeping. And then I was like, I'm going to go back and just tell him that I'm sorry I put him in this situation, that I'm still as brilliant today as he thought I was yesterday, and he was really amazing because he said, I can't work with someone like Archbishop Desmond Tutu and not walk my talk. So he kept me on, and then we ended up building the agency and growing. And then just last year I left and started my own agency. So yeah, it was quite a journey, and it was really, but I was keeping a secret the whole time from all of these amazing authors, like you can see on the wall here, that I was working with closely. But I was so afraid that people would Google me or find out my past, and I eventually, the first author I told was Bryan Stevenson, and it wasn't like we're working with very non-judgy people, Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, but we're going to India. That was a business trip to work on the Book of Joy. And I'm not sure I'm going to be let in the country because I have a criminal record. And so I was just in fear that whole plane ride and not knowing, and then afraid the Dalai Lama was going to see in my soul and see how it was bad. It was like,
oh my gosh. And what was that conversation like, telling Bryan Stevenson?
I mean, it was interesting because he'd asked us to come to Alabama to see if we wanted to work on The Sun Does Shine with Anthony Ray Hinton. And we're at breakfast, and Doug's like, Lara, would you tell, I'm taking a bite of eggs. Will you tell Bryan about your past? And I was like, because this is my secret, and I think the world's going to end if I tell people, and it's going to hurt the reputation of Doug and the agency. And so I told him, and he was just like, thank you for sharing. And that's so great that you have experience that will help to working on the book. Like it was like that moment where my past became like a selling point, both when Doug was selling the book to editors, like he was saying, do you know how hard it is to find an MFA who's been incarcerated? We have the greatest collaborative writer. And I was like, how am I a selling point now? Like it was such a switch in my brain of what I imagined would happen when people found out, and ultimately like no one was judging me as hard as I judged myself, or more unforgiving. I mean, some people judge me, they still do, but no one was as hard on me as I was on myself ultimately. But it was I was working with a woman, Evie Pumpuris, who was doing a book. She's a former Secret Service agent, right? So we're working on her book, and she's talking about all the bad guys, that she's catching as in law enforcement and stuff. And I was like, ooh, I should tell her about my past because she's kind of working with a bad guy in her definition, and so she was amazing, and she's become one of my closest friends.
She was on my podcast or maybe an Instagram Live.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It was during it was during like the lockdown.
Yeah. Her book came out in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but we had a nice conversation.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. So then why did you leave that agency? Sorry, I'm jumping all over. I'm like dying to know your whole life story and your career story and all this stuff. So why did you leave that agency, and tell me about your new agency and your clients and all of that?
Yeah. So my new agency is True Literary, and it's really, I like the name because it's not only, I don't just focus on memoir, but that is my kind of sweet spot specialty. And if I'm not reading fiction personally, then I want to read memoir. It's kind of my favorite genre in nonfiction, because I think there's no other way to hack empathy other than memoir. Like, you're never closer to another person's brain. I don't know of another way besides reading a first person memoir of somebody. Like, I don't know another way. We're
listening to the audiobook of the first person memoir.
There you go.
Maybe that's like the only other.
Yeah. I narrated my audio, so we'll see how that turns out. But so I just wanted to work at an agency that was true to me. And I think, Idea Architects is an amazing company. Doug's my agent, really close friend, but I just felt like as I was growing and changing, it was just time for me to kind of go out on my own and do my own thing and really focus on the books I wanted to focus on. As things get bigger and bigger, you kind of have other things you need to focus on in an agency to support that. And I just really wanted to work with, I love working with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and working on all those books, but like the Sylvia Vasquez Lovatos of the world.
Oh my God, such a good book.
Yeah. So I love, it's just really focusing on the voices I want to focus on. And just building my own thing that, like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm getting, sometimes, I mean, I'm, not the youngest person, but I feel like I'm just getting started in a way with the new company. And I used to own my own business. So it's just a nice feeling, just a nice way to work for me.
Amazing. I love it. So how does it feel knowing all this behind the scenes stuff about book publishing and all of it? And now your own book is coming out and
oh my God. It's funny because, like, even, I've talked to authors off so many ledges at different stages of the book selling and writing and production and launching process. And I am the worst. Like, I am doing all the things that I tell them not to worry about. Even the editor calls, like, it was amazing. The book sold at auction with a lot of big houses, but the editor calls, I think after the first day of editor calls, I was picking up one of my sons at the airport, and I was on the phone to Rachel Newman, who's another agent at Idea Architects, just like sobbing in the parking lot, like, oh, I'm horrible at this. I don't know, just like all of the craziness that you do when you're feeling vulnerable to, I've always had a lot of empathy for my authors, but I definitely have a lot more being on this side of it. And it's weird. It's weird to have a publicist when I'm advising on publicists, or to do promotion, because I'm really great at hyping other people and advocating for other people. And it's just like a whole different, I'm not so great at doing it for myself. We'll see how it goes, but it is just a whole other thing to deal with.
Oh my gosh. And then the writing process itself, what was that experience like? And when did you fit that into everything else you were doing and all of that?
So I took a little sabbatical off work last winter. So the book sold in like June. And so the manuscript was due the following June, a year to deliver the manuscript to write it. And so I took 7 weeks off in mid-January to mid-March and wrote the full draft of the book in 7 weeks, first draft. And I went,
oh my gosh.
And I went to, I was like, I have to go away to do it. I can't be at home with my family. I can't be at work. I have to be in a completely different time zone to actually be away from my family and work. And so I went, and I was like, where do I want to go in the world? So I went to Thailand by myself last year for 7 weeks and wrote the book. And it was hard. It was like hard to kind of relive all that stuff. And at one point I was like, it was not the rainy season of Thailand, but literally when I was writing the darkest chapter of the book, there was like a thunderstorm shaking the house, and it was like a monsoon. And I was like, am I controlling the weather? Is that like with my darkness, So I did, in my mind, I was like, I just have to get a first draft done in this time. So I literally finished it on the plane ride home. I changed planes in Doha and wrote a chapter on the layover, and then spent, quite a bit of time with my editor, Eamon Dolan at Simon Schuster, like rewriting. And I'm much better at first drafting than rewriting, or the editing part was harder for me. But I had to go away. I mean, I was still selling books. So I was like doing editor calls at 1 a.m. Thailand time. And, but I really had to get kind of space around me to get it out. So, yeah.
I said, oh my gosh, like 50 times.
That's okay.
It's all just so awesome. How do you make sure that the drug piece and the addiction and all of that forever stays at bay? Like, do you worry about that?
Well, I mean, I don't overly worry about it. I worry, it's been 14 years now, so I feel pretty good. But I think for me, the rock bottom I hit was so below any rock bottom I ever could have imagined that that was enough. And I think I have I've done a lot of work, so a lot of self-awareness to know if I'm feeling squirrely or antsy. And so far, so good, 14 years out. So, I mean, I can't imagine, I used to need to take 20 Vicodin to like call PG&E to make like a payment arrangement, right? Like just like to have a conversation. I mean, I know we're not in person, but looking someone in the eye and doing all of that. So that sort of fear of connection has left me, I guess you would say. So, if I start thinking it's a good idea, I know who to call and how to get help. I'm not afraid to ask for help anymore, which is a gift for me.
What is your one piece of advice that aspiring authors should know?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that ultimately, if you have a great story and you're a great writer, like to just believe in that more than all the voices that are like, it's so hard to get an agent to email you back. And it's so hard in publishing. It's who you know, whatever. Like, I really do believe that great stories that have universals for people in the world, whether it's a novel or memoir, a big idea book, that it's not, if it's for the greater good, I really believe, and it's great writing, of course, that you'll find a way. So I think people, everyone has trauma, and I think there's gold in that to share, to inspire other people, to help other people. I think there's a lot of gold in that.
Have you ever taught a class? You should teach a Zibby class. We offer like a class platform.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, I taught creative writing, and when I was getting my MFA at UC Irvine and a class at UC Santa Cruz. It's funny, I just joined a memoir writing class, as a speaker at the University of Washington with this amazing author, Patsada Rang, who teaches that. And I was like, oh, I guess I have a lot to say about memoir writing and agenting. So yeah, it's on my side hustle list, probably.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna.
Okay, yeah, hit me up.
You after this. Even just like mining trauma for gold, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and it's always a fine line because there's exploiting the trauma, but finding the gold in it. I think it's memoir. I think for me and for the authors I've worked with who have trauma in their memoirs, like The Sun Does Shine. He was 30 years as an innocent man in jail, in prison, in death row. But I think that there is gold in the inspiration of that, even if it's just like, wow, if someone can get through that, I can get through whatever my thing is. Like, I just think there's a lot of amazing stories out there. There's a lot of ordinary people with extraordinary stories, and that's kind of my jam.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to connect you to the class platform with this woman, Darcy. I am also going to keep my eyes peeled for anything you submit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I will definitely hit you. I will hit you up.
Yeah. And thank you so much. This is so inspiring. Your story is amazing and inspiring, and you are just a total rock star.
Thank you so much. And they Hollywood read all my trauma. I thought I was pouring my trauma.
It's gonna be,
and they're like, this is hilarious. So yeah, so it's gonna.
I forgot to mention that. I saw
gonna
that.
Be it's a
Bad Neighbor or something, right?
The Neighbor from Hell was original. Neighbor from Hell and Other People I've Been was the original title of my book.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, titles change, as you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the right title. Awesome.
Amazing. Congratulations. When is that coming out, by the way? Do they have
I don't know. Writer's strike. So we'll see. Yeah. Okay. It takes years. So we'll see.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.